If you're drafting a fantasy football team this year, odds are you're making a mistake at the wide receiver position because most fantasy drafters are taking the wrong players. I'm seeing it right now in hundreds of drafts this summer. But in this video, I'll walk you through 5 wide receivers you want to be taking instead so you can actually win your league. And if you're not familiar, I'm Sal Vetri. I've been helping people win their fantasy leagues for nearly 8 years now, and I plan to do the same for you in this here video. And let's start with the Bears wide receiver DJ Moore, who probably had like one of the weirdest and wackiest 1,000-yard seasons last year. He had a disappointing season for the most part, and now he currently goes right here as the 49th overall player in fantasy drafts. Outside the top 20 fantasy receivers, he'll probably sneak in there as Rashee Rice will continue to fall due to that suspension that's looming, and by the time you're watching this, maybe even out. But here's the thing. He's currently going after, and somewhat well after, Marvin Harrison Jr., who goes about a round before DJ Moore in round 3 or so of fantasy drafts right now, and to me, that's a mistake. I mean, let's break it down. You could look at this and you could say, okay, DJ Moore averaged 14 fantasy points per game last year based on where he was drafted as like a top 24 wide receiver, him finishing as the wide receiver 26. Okay, it's a little bit of a disappointment. He obviously didn't help you win your leagues, but if you actually do think about it, this was like a worst case scenario, and he still averaged 14 points per game. And when you look at his expected fantasy points based off the role that he had, he was supposed to average nearly 17 points per game, a top 15 finish. So the role was good because he was always on the field. He ran 100% of his team's routes when he was actually healthy for the games, and he ran the 4th most routes in the NFL, over 37 routes run per game. So we know that he was seeing a lot of snaps, a lot of opportunities. When you go over to the actual targets that DJ Moore was seeing last year, you could see right here, top 10 in the NFL in targets with 8.2 per game, 140 on the season, a 27% target share. I know I'm doing a lot of nerd talk right now, throwing out numbers, but earning 27% of your team's targets, that's borderline elite. And the reason why I want to bring this up is because, yeah, he didn't have the greatest fantasy season of all time, but he was able to produce in like one of the worst offensive environments possible. Because DJ Moore's coaching staff was terrible. It was arguably the worst offensive line in football, and he was playing with Caleb Williams, who at the time was a rookie, and during this rookie year, he ranked bottom 10 in a lot of categories. Check this out. He was 40th in passer rating, 25th in true completion percentage, and 40th in accuracy. So DJ Moore was seeing volume, it just wasn't accurate, and the Bears kind of neutered where DJ Moore was earning his targets. Let me explain. As you can see in these stats from Player Profiler, his yards per reception the previous seasons was about 14 yards, 14.2 yards. These are with the Chicago Bears right here, 14.2 yards. But here's the issue. Last year, just 9.9 yards. So his yards per reception is dropping by like 50%. What does that mean? If you watch these games, if you're a Bears fan, you know this. If you watch the film or any highlights, DJ Moore was just seeing a ton more screens, short area targets. Part of this was because of terrible play calling. Part of this was because he had a rookie quarterback to try and get him comfortable with a bad offensive line. So you had to get the ball out quick. But now that offensive line should be completely different because the Bears overhauled it. They had to this offseason. As you can see right here, this is the team changes tracker, the offseason moves, the additions column on the left in green on this year video. You can see they got Jonah Jackson a guard. They get Joe Thuney, Drew Thalman in free agency a center, right? They draft a second-round tackle in Ozzie Trapilo. So this is on the team changes tracker. It's in the fantasy blueprint. You can check it out if you want it. Join theblueprint.com. Limited time, or there's a limited spots available for this year. But just to show you how much the offensive line improved, as you can see Ian Hartit's tweet here referencing PFF's offensive line ranks from the end of last season to preseason of 2025. So what does this take into account? Players getting healthier, the draft, free agency. The number one most improved team right now in terms of PFF's rankings, Chicago Bears. They went from finishing last year to 24th to their preseason rank being 4th. So a plus 20 difference, a significant difference, and it makes sense when you see all the things that they specifically did in free agency, a little bit in the draft as well. So I bring this all up to say that the offensive line is going to be better for a year 2 quarterback in Caleb Williams, who I have a lot of hopes for, which should help DJ Moore, especially maybe get more targets downfield. And it should also help when we're talking about Ben Johnson coming in as the head coach here, who is the offensive coordinator for the Lions, passing game coordinator for the Lions in the past few seasons as well. And Ben Johnson just turned the Lions into a top 2 scoring offense, and let's not forget that he recently called DJ Moore similar to Amon-Ra St. Brown, or at least he sees similarities to St. Brown, his former number 1 receiver with the Lions. And as you can see these past couple of years, with Ben Johnson there as the passing game coordinator a couple of years back, top 10 wide receiver. The offensive coordinator the last 2 years, top 5 wide receiver. Now, obviously, it's not as easy to just say, okay, let's now plug and play DJ Moore into the Amon-Ra St. Brown role. They're totally different wide receivers, but they're both elite talents. And maybe if you're number 1 now, DJ Moore for the Bears is going to be led by Ben Johnson, that could mean a lot of good things. And by the way, Ben Johnson just a year ago did this. In fantasy football, he produced 2 top 25 wide receivers, a top 5 running back, and a top 10 tight end. And let's not forget, David Montgomery was also very fantasy relevant. So I don't want to hear the argument about the too many mouths to feed in Chicago with the rookies coming in at tight end and receiver and Roma Dunze being there and whatever you think of the backfield. I don't want to hear it. Because for my money, DJ Moore is still the alpha of this offense. Yes, Roma Dunze was a top 10 pick and he profiles out as a very talented player. We didn't see it last year as his rookie year. We've seen it for DJ Moore for seasons now. Yes, Luther Burton is a second round rookie dealing dealing with a lot of injuries, mostly just a hamstring in training camp, getting benched early on in training camp, or at least taken off the field, right? I don't want to hear that these guys are going to be threats to a potential elite target share of 25+% for one DJ Moore. He's the guy here, and when I compare him right now to Marvin Harrison, who goes 10 to 12 picks before him, that's a round before him in fantasy drafts, it's crazy. Because let's just look at this comparison. You're going to take Marvin Harrison a round before DJ Moore when they're both number one receivers for their team. We're hoping that both of their offenses will be improved this year, but at this point right now, you have Marvin Harrison dealing with major offensive line concerns. You're talking about a guy who's going to compete with Trey McBride, who's actually the number one receiver on this team. Trey McBride, the tight end for the Cardinals last season, was up there as like a borderline top 5 player in overall receptions and the way that he was used in the passing attack. We know James Conner is going to be heavily utilized on the ground as well. So Marvin Harrison, sure, he's going to be a priority in this offense, but how much will it be compared to DJ Moore and his? Especially when there's reason to believe that DJ Moore's role can change, whereas Marvin Harrison, as you can see Adam Pfeiffer's tweet right here, it says Marvin Harrison's usage last year was puzzling in his rookie season. If we look at kind of the ways that they were using him, they were using Marvin Harrison, who's not known as like this downfield separator. That's why he didn't even run the 40 time. He's not known for speed. You can see right here, deep targets, 26, pre-snap motion targets, just 1. So he's never put in motion. He's just getting put up on the outside and getting told to run go routes, 22 go routes. You can see right here, 6 most in the NFL. And with the same offensive coordinator and most of the same coaching staff and personnel there, like I just don't really know if it's going to change that much entering year 2. You would hope they would say, oh yeah, that didn't work last year, let's change that, but there's not as many moving pieces. Offensive line still a concern, same quarterback in terms of his skill set, so will it change? At least in terms of DJ Moore going around later, I'd rather just take my chances on an ascending offense with a brand new improved coach. So give me DJ Moore over Marvin Harrison Jr., who actually goes around later than him, so you're getting a lot of value. Now let's go to these next guys who go earlier in drafts, because I want to talk about Nico Collins, who I love right now. I mean, he was flat out dominant last year. When he's been healthy the last 2 seasons, he's been dominant in fantasy football. And Nico Collins, you don't even have to spend a first round pick on him most of the time. He goes as the 13th overall pick, which is in the second round for 10-team formats, oftentimes falling to the second round in 12-team formats as well. And I love getting him there right now, because I would much rather have Nico Collins than a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown, who goes ahead of him in round 1 as a top 10 pick in fantasy right now. Don't get me wrong, both of these guys are good. That's why they're going as top 15 fantasy picks in 2025 drafts, but give me Nico over Amon-Ra every single day. That might sound crazy to some people, but let me break it down. Nico Collins, the last 2 seasons, oh yeah, he's been a top 8 wide receiver both of those seasons, despite having totally different competition each year, despite dealing with injuries each of those seasons. I mean, let's just look at some of these efficiency metrics. You want to talk about a guy who dominates? Last year, he was top 3 in the NFL in yards per route run, probably the most predictive stat. He was averaging almost 3 yards every single time he ran a route. He had a 57% contested catch rate. That's awesome. In terms of his target rate versus man coverage, led the entire NFL. He was earning a target from CJ Stroud 41% of the time in man coverage. If they saw man coverage, they're like, yeah, just throw it in Nico, it'll work. And it usually did. Now let's look at another metric right here. The best average separation score in vertically breaking routes in 2024. So these are your downfield plays that lead to explosives, getting separation on those. Nico Collins led the NFL. Go figure, right? The best wide receiver in PFF's database the last 2 years in terms of overall wide receiver grades, factors in everything you do as a player. Nico Collins. It's not Amon-Ra, not Jamar Chase, although he's up there. Both of those guys are up there. It's Nico Collins. This guy has been somewhat underrated in the mainstream media. In fantasy circles, not as much, but compared to Amon-Ra St. Brown, I want Nico. Let's not get it twisted. Before injury last year, he was probably going to finish as like maybe a top 5 overall player in fantasy. His first 4 games before getting injured in that 5th game, he ends up averaging over 22 fantasy points per game, not 7.5 targets per game, 7.5 receptions per game, according to RotoViz's game splits tool, and over 122 receiving yards per game. This guy was an absolute monster. That is a pace of over 1,900 yards. I have it right here, 109 catches and 10 touchdowns. Insane. And he was doing this while competing with Stephon Diggs before his injury, and Diggs was pretty good for the first month of the season. Tank Dell as well before his injury, right? He was competing with legit competition. And now this year, the competition is much less proven. You have a 2nd round pick in Jaden Higgins, who I actually like. I think he could have been a 1st round pick. He'll likely be the starting outside receiver opposite Nico Collins. You have Christian Kirk, a veteran out of the slot who had a good OTAs and so far a good training camp. As of right now, if he stays healthy, he should beat out their 3rd round rookie receiver in Jalen Noel. But as of right now, like if your main competition is Jaden Higgins and Christian Kirk, I would consider this on paper entering 2025 a downgrade from Tank Dell, what he was doing coming off of his rookie year last year before injury, and Stephon Diggs, right? So you're looking at even easier competition for Nico Collins to deal with from a target share perspective. Now there is a new offense here in terms of offensive coordinator, so that can maybe make some people a little bit concerned. I wouldn't think so. I think if anything, it should help an offense that kind of looked like it was fuming out at times, although dealing with a lot of injuries and awful offensive line play last year. You can see talking about his new offensive coordinator, he says, get your playmakers the ball. I feel like Nick really making that an emphasis. That yards after the catch ability is what Nico Collins said. Makes sense. If your best player is Nico Nico Collins, you can put him in the slot, have yards after the catch ability. Vertical breaking routes on the outside, yards after the catch ability. That's where this guy dominated last year, and especially those first 4 games. So as I mentioned, I do like Nico Collins, who goes 13th overall, ahead of Amon-Ra St. Brown. You don't even have to take him there. You can just wait. Like if you have a late round pick this year, oh man, I love it. Sometimes you could even get Christian McCaffrey and Nico Collins. That's a great start. You want to double up on the wide receiver, young guys, Nico Collins and Brian Thomas Jr. I love that start as well. But specifically as to why I like Nico Collins over Amon-Ra, it's splitting hairs in the first round, right? These guys are obviously talented first to second round fantasy picks, but Amon-Ra's situation is trending down. First off, very quietly, the Lions have lost Kevin Zeitler, a guard, a top 5 player at his position last year, arguably, and Frank Ragnow, maybe the best overall center in the NFL last season, especially from a run blocking and also solid as a pass protector, right? So their offensive line is taking a step back from like best unit in the league to closer to league average, probably still a borderline top 10 unit, but that's still a downgrade. And as we mentioned earlier, well, now Ben Johnson is a part of the Lions, the offensive coordinator who has made this offense great the last 3 to 4 seasons. He's no longer with the Detroit Lions, so that's probably going to hurt you a little bit, right? Probably a little bit. In some ways, your offense is also due for regression. You have a ton of playmakers with Sam Laporta, Jameson, Jahmyr Gibbs out of the backfield, right? So it's not as easy to just go out there and have 100 plus receptions. So when we talk about the competition, although it is the same as last year, Jameson only seems to be getting better. Jahmyr Gibbs continues to get more dominant. We'll see what the new offensive coordinator does with Sam Laporta, who he didn't have a good start to the year last year, but he had a very strong finish to the year, especially when we're considering his role in the red zone. So again, Amon-Ra St. Brown is great. We know how consistent he's been the last 3 years as a top 10 fantasy receiver, but so is Nico Collins the last 2 years since he's had CJ Stroud, and I think that's only going to continue and maybe even level up to another extent this year. And just to kind of put finishing touches on this conversation, CJ Stroud last season when he was throwing to Nico Collins was an absolute monster. A 107 rating, one of the best in the NFL. He was getting a half a point expected, a half a point for your overall total every time he just threw a ball. Target to Nico Collins is insane. When Nico Collins wasn't out there, everything dropped. He went from every single time dropping back to getting a half a point expectation to not even being able to score a point. It was actually better for the opposing team when CJ Stroud dropped back, which is insane last year. Negative EPA per drop back. Like that's one of the craziest stats I ever said. But Nico Collins on the field, every time they targeted him, they got almost a half a point on average on offense across targets. When he wasn't out there, they were losing points, giving up points to the competition when Nico Collins wasn't out there and they passed. That's how big of a difference Nico Collins makes. And if you want to see exactly where I have Nico ranked in my top 50 overall rankings completely free, you can check it out right now, link down below, or you can head to fantasyrankingsfree.com. That is fantasyrankingsfree.com. That will take you to this page where you enter your email and I'll instantly send you the top 50 rankings. Make sure to check your spam and promotional folders just in case as well. And that will send you the top 50 rankings highlighting the best and worst values in each range as well as player tiers. But if you're a serious fantasy player and you want my full top 250, all my other drafting tools and my in-season tools from draft day to championship week, that's exactly why I built the Fantasy Blueprint. It's what I use in all my leagues and over 10,000 people are currently using in their leagues. You could use the link in the description below or head to jointheblueprint.com and it'll take you to this page where you can learn more about the Fantasy Blueprint. That is jointheblueprint.com. There's also a bunch of just testimonials on here as well of people talking about what they got from the Blueprint, winning their leagues, getting to the playoffs in all their leagues, whatever it might have been. And the biggest thing here is people who were on the Blueprint last year, about 85% of them are returning. So almost 9 out of 10 people who used it last year said, yeah, that was worth it. I'm coming back this year, which I think shows you how helpful the Blueprint actually is. But I should say that there are limited spots available this year. We just had to reopen a couple of more spots for people who couldn't get in. So if you want to get in, now's the time. So be sure to check out the Blueprint, link down below, or head to jointheblueprint.com. Now let's talk about this next player here, and Jalen Waddle, who I'm not going to lie to you, it was a mess last year. Jalen Waddle, who had a great start to his career as the wide receiver 12, the wide receiver 21. Last year, the wide receiver 50 in fantasy points per game. He had just 2 touchdowns, only 83 targets, by far the worst season of his career easily. So this might seem crazy to you, but I'm buying the dip on Jalen Waddle, who last year was like a 2nd or 3rd round fantasy pick. Now he's the 75th overall player, the wide receiver 33. The dude's going in like round 6 or 7. And you want to know who's going 20 picks before him? Zay Flowers, and that's a mistake. I would much rather have right now, straight up, I'm not even talking about the value of 2 rounds later, straight up give me Jalen Waddle this season over Zay Flowers. Let me explain. Look, last year, every single thing went wrong. Everybody missed time with injuries. Waddle got hurt, obviously Tua missed time, Tyreek had injuries, and I think that this team just had to basically go out there and say, whatever works, works. Let's just lean on Devon Achane and later in the season, Jonnu Smith, which led to Waddle having by far his worst season. He had over 1,000 yards his first 3 seasons. Last season, just 744 yards in 15 games. And I think the reason why was this team just started to check the ball down more. Devon Achane led the NFL in receptions for running backs, right? You're talking about Jonnu Smith popping up out of nowhere. And when they did go downfield, they targeted Tyreek. So it was either Tyreek downfield or short areas to Jonnu and Devon Achane, which left nothing for Waddle. But even despite a poor 2025 season, the past 2 seasons, Waddle still ranks top 10 in yards per route run and wide receiver efficiency. And now he walks into a pretty good bounce back setup because as you can see in the team changes tracker, the substitutions on offense, the key substitutions, you can see Jonnu Smith is no longer on the team. He was traded to the Pittsburgh Steelers, which is going to open up 111 targets on this team, especially in those shorter to intermediate parts where Waddle was severely lacking last year. And we also know that the biggest competition for the third straight season will continue to be Tyreek Hill, who now is over the age of 30, who seems like, if anything, his best days are behind him at this point. And a lot of people will point to the fact that this guy ran like such a fast time, 10-second time for whatever race that he just recently did. Okay, running in a straight line, yes, that speed is going to continue, but how about just a decrease in efficiency we saw last year from Tyreek Hill, the motivations around everything we're seeing since the end of last year to this year about the role that he wants to play in this offense and moving forward, saying that he planned to retire at this age anyways, right? These types of things are a little bit alarming compared to a player who is trending up in terms of age and early breakout in one Jalen Waddle. And outside of like Tyreek, there's really no other competition on this team. Malik Washington, I'm not really scared. Nick Westbrook, I'm not scared at all. Like, right, we come down here, there's nobody. Maybe a guy breaks out in training camp. Darren Waller's already on the PUP list in training camp. Not really concerned about him. I think he's more so coming back for a little bit of money as opposed to coming back to actually go out there and be a contributor after taking a year off of football. And honestly, the last couple of times we've seen him, he just hasn't been able to stay healthy even when active. And now he spent another year away from football, year plus. So I think from a competition standpoint, Jonnu being gone opens up a lot for Jalen Waddle. And let's look at this right here. 2025 from Hayden Winks on Twitter, projected points, plays, passing, and runs. If we look at the Dolphins, they're projected to be one of the most run heavy or pass heavy teams in the NFL. Miami, this number right here, 35.7, they're projected to throw nearly 36 times per game. That's top 10 in the NFL right now, according to Vegas betting lines. So yeah, we're looking at another pass heavy team. And remember the last time that they were pass heavy with the healthy Tua? It was 2023. It wasn't that long ago when Tua, outside of last year when he was hurt, of course, but 2023, what did Tua do? He comes out here, plays all 17 games, stayed healthy, led the NFL in passing yards over 4,600, right? 560 pass attempts, was top 5 in passing touchdowns as well. If this can start to happen again, well, then I think Jalen Waddle in round 6 to 7 of drafts as the 75th overall pick is an absolute steal, especially compared to Zay Flowers, who we said is going ahead of him. And this is just a massive mistake for so many reasons. I mean, for starters, Zay Flowers last year had Lamar Jackson with a career high in passing yards, throwing 40 plus passing touchdowns, the best year maybe Lamar will ever have as a passer, and Flowers wasn't even a top 30 fantasy receiver. And now he has similar competition, if not a little bit more difficult, with Rashad Bateman coming off of a career year and getting a contract this offseason. The team went out there and signed DeAndre Hopkins. Whatever you want to think about Hopkins, especially in the red zone, he should be a factor for this team. And speaking of the red zone, Mark Andrews was a red zone monster last year. Isaiah Likely, all they're doing in OTAs and now training camp is praising Isaiah Likely. So Zay Flowers' competition isn't getting any easier. By the way, this is still a run-heavy team that ranked number 1 or number 2 with the Eagles in every run metric last year and bottom 3 in the NFL in every passing metric in terms of pass attempts per game and passing yards per game. And then you go, okay, Zay Flowers probably has to score like 10 to 12 touchdowns to pay off a 4th or a 5th round draft price, but last year he only had 8 red zone targets, only had 4 overall red zone receptions. That's not great. You come down to his red zone target share, the dude was averaging just 13% of his team's red zone targets, a team that already is going to run the ball a lot with Lamar and Derrick Henry in the red zone. They already have dudes who are proven red zone monsters like Mark Andrews and now DeAndre Hopkins on the team. I just don't know how Zay Flowers pays off this draft price. There's nothing indicating that he will. I'll take Jalen Waddle rounds later. And oh yeah, by the way, right now in DraftKings Sportsbook, they have Jalen Waddle projected for 925.5 for his more or less on receiving yards this year, and that's more than Zay Flowers, who is at 900. Jalen Waddle, if we go into the touchdowns as well, is projected for 5.5 touchdowns this year compared to Zay Flowers at 4.5. So we're talking about Waddle literally projected by Vegas to have more overall touchdowns and yards than Zay Flowers, but Flowers still goes 2 rounds earlier. Make it make sense. Now, before we keep getting into the next player, take 2 seconds to hit the subscribe button. It goes a really long way in helping this content reach even more people like yourself. Because I want to talk about CeeDee Lamb, one of the most consistent wide receivers despite the situation in fantasy, and honestly, he has a situation to bounce back this year. Now, CeeDee Lamb, we know he's a first-round pick as of this recording in fantasy. He goes as the wide receiver 3, the 6th overall pick, but Justin Jefferson is going ahead of him right now. And look, it's a coin flip. They go 5 and 6 in fantasy drafts, number 2 and number 3 amongst wide receivers, with Jamar Chase average draft position being number 1 right now. But I want CeeDee Lamb, and there's a lot of reasons why you should as well. First off, this dude last season was still a top 10 fantasy receiver despite literally not having his starting quarterback for half the season and Lamb being hurt. Despite all that, CeeDee Lamb said, yeah, I'll still average 17.6 fantasy points per game, the 7th most amongst wide receivers last year. Yeah, I'll still go out there and dominate, ranking top 5 in receptions, putting up 1,200 receiving yards. If you go to the targets as well, he was a monster, averaging over 10 targets per game, 152. Again, the second half of the season, not having Dak for most of those games, having a shoulder injury that he kept coming in and out of the games for, right? He had literally Cooper Rush as his starting quarterback for half the year. But now what do you get? You get Dak Prescott entering the season healthy and looking like the best situation he's been in since he doesn't have to deal with a contract dispute or any injuries. He's healthy and he's now back with CeeDee Lamb. This connection should be perfect week 1. You also get a Cowboys offense that has shown no interest in actually investing in their running game this offseason. They lose Rico Dowdle, they bring in Javonte, they draft Jaden and blue. They bring in Miles Sanders. Okay, I don't really think, based on the personnel in their backfield, that this team is going to go out there and run the ball a ton, right? I'm not really concerned about that. They're also projected right now to be top 5 in terms of overall passing volume. If you were to pull back up that Hayden Winks tweet and you scroll down to Dallas in terms of passing attempts per game right now, we can pull it up. Let's scroll down. Dallas projected to throw over 35 times per game. That's borderline top 5 in the NFL right now. So we know we're going to have the volume as well. And from a competition perspective, I mean, compared to like 3 months ago, sure, there's a little bit more competition because the team went out and traded for George Pickens, but Pickens should just be dominating on the outside. That allows you to put CeeDee Lamb really to work in the slot even more. 2 wide receiver sets, of course, they'll both be out there. Lamb can work in the slot even more, opening up yards after the catch opportunities, even more routes run and snaps against worse cornerbacks who don't move into the slot after being on the outside where most of the premier cornerbacks play. And let me just remind you, the last time that we had a healthy CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott together for a stretch of games, you have to go back to the end of 2023, those final 11 games, because last year both CeeDee Lamb and Dak at different times were hurt, but those final 11 games, CeeDee Lamb averaged 28.8 fantasy points per game. Yes, 28.8. Over 9, not targets, 9.2 receptions per game and 115 yards per game. He went on to be the wide receiver 1 this season in 2023. It was a top 3 season ever for a fantasy wide receiver, and now that same quarterback is coming back. You would hope a better offensive environment this year with Mike McCarthy gone, right? And they're just going to throw the ball again. So now when I compare this to Justin Jefferson, look, it's so hard to compare these two. They're 2 of the 3 best probably wide receivers, at worst 2 of the 5 best wide receivers in the NFL and for fantasy football. Jefferson has a lot of claims to be the best wide receiver in fantasy on a routes run perspective, but if we have to just split some hairs here, the first thing for Justin Jefferson, he has the hamstring injury in training camp, suffered it 6 weeks before the season, doesn't seem major, so that's not a big concern, but it's just a little thing that we have to make for our decision between these 2 elite guys. And the second thing for Justin Jefferson, like no doubt, yeah, he's great, but he still has somewhat of a quarterback question. Don't get me wrong, like I do right now like JJ McCarthy, especially in round 11 or 12 of your fantasy drafts. I think any quarterback in a Kevin O'Connell system with a strong offensive line can find success, including McCarthy, but there is that question compared to CeeDee Lamb. Doesn't have the question with Dak. We saw them dominate in 2023 together. Here's just a little bit more about that hamstring from a Sports MD analysis. Deepak Chona, who we trust, a Harvard-trained sports surgeon, on Twitter. He says Justin Jefferson reportedly very mild hamstring, which means average in season is 1 to 2 weeks. During camp, they're a little bit more cautious, 2 to 4 weeks. He suffered this injury 6 weeks before the season, so he should be back by probably like midway through the preseason. So that part of it is good, but again, we should mention it. And in terms of the competition, Jordan Addison might get suspended a couple of games, sure, right? So Jordan Addison, though, first round pick, competition, talented wide receiver 2. TJ Hawkinson, now another year removed after coming back mid-season around Thanksgiving from his ACL. He's a talented former first round pick, right? This is the competition that you're seeing right now for Justin Jefferson. You also have pass catching running backs out of the backfield like Aaron Jones, who put up 1,500 total yards last year in terms of rushing and receiving. So a lot of other guys who can be involved in the Vikings offense. To take away like a mega ceiling from Justin Jefferson for going for like 1,800 yards where it's just George Pickens. There's no running backs. Jake Ferguson, I think he'll have a nice red zone role, but I don't see him being like this 800-yard tight end. So it's really CeeDee Lamb. Competition is weaker, not a quarterback question. As of right now, no injury concerns. I'm taking him right now in fantasy. Now, before we get into a wide receiver that you need to be drafting in round 2, I have to point out just how important wide receivers are on PPR formats like DraftKings Best Ball. Because earlier we talked about a player in DJ Moore, as you can see right here. This is a video all about receivers, and he's currently going on DraftKings Best Ball as the wide receiver 20. So he's going as a top 20 wide receiver. He's going after guys like Marvin Harrison, which obviously we agree with based on what we talked about earlier. But here's the real case for DJ Moore and why he's very interesting in these PPR formats over some of the running backs who go right ahead of him. And some of those running backs would be a James Cook. They would be a Kyren Williams. And I point out James Cook specifically and Kyren Williams specifically because these guys are not as involved as elite receiving threats in their offense. You might think Kyren Williams is. He wasn't used that way last year. Same thing for James Cook, who actually got outgained by Ty Johnson, a RB3 in his own backfield as a receiver last year. And that's the real edge that a guy like DJ Moore in round 4 can give you, who seems to be the wide receiver 1 on his offense and potentially a high volume wide receiver 1. This is a guy who could see 130 plus targets this year. Now, I've teamed up with DraftKings Best Ball, and just a week ago, we did a live draft on this channel where I actually took DJ Moore in round 4 ahead of some of these running backs. Now, if you're not familiar, DraftKings Best Ball is a fantasy game type where you draft your team once, no waivers, no trades, and no setting your lineups. And that's what makes DraftKings Best Ball so much fun. It's the best part of fantasy, which is drafting, and then you just watch your team ride. All right, I just wanted to make sure you knew about that and the strategy when it comes to like PPR formats and these wide receivers. Now let's get into that second round receiver. Now that wide receiver in the second round that I'm targeting is Mr. Ladd McConkey, because last year his season totals were ridiculous. The dude was absolutely dominant, and now you can get him at the end of the second round, sometimes the third round. Look at this. He's going as the 26th overall player as of this recording. Early third round pick. I want that all day long, and actually I'm taking him right now ahead of AJ Brown, who currently goes a couple of picks before him in the second round of fantasy drafts, and here's why. McConkey was a rookie last season, literally a rookie last season, and immediately became the Chargers' #1 wide receiver. He had doubters, oh, he's only a slot receiver. No, he dominated in the slot and on the outside, and check this out. Over the final 10 games of his rookie season, right, so he starts to learn how to be a pro, he starts to dominate. 17.8 fantasy points per game, almost 6 catches per game, 88 yards per game. He was a monster. He had at least 14 fantasy points in 8 out of 10 games. During that stretch, he was a top 12 fantasy receiver. And you can look at a bunch of different stats, but check this out right here. Most receiving yards per game by a rookie over their last 8 games, the past 5 years. #1 is Ladd McConkey with 107 yards per game, ahead of the Jamar Chase amazing rookie year, ahead of the Justin Jefferson amazing rookie year, and Puka Nacua, even Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors last year. #1 was Ladd McConkey, ahead of all of those amazing guys, plenty of which, all the guys I just mentioned, go in the first round of fantasy drafts. And let's not forget, that doesn't even take into account his playoff game where he goes out there and he catches 9 balls for 197 yards and a touchdown. He has 14 targets. The next closest guy on his team has 5 targets, a tight end, Will Dissly, right? He was just dominate for the Chargers. Obviously, Justin Herbert loves him. Jim Harbaugh loves him. The offensive coordinator, Greg Roman, loves him. Everything you look at from this dude who put up 35 points in his first ever playoff game in the NFL for fantasy purposes, like, you know, your DraftKings daily fantasy, 35 points in the biggest game of his career, just says, yeah, it's fine. And all the metrics look great. As a rookie, ranked top 10 in yards per route run, averaging over 2.5 yards every single time he ran a route. He was top 10 in separation and win rate versus man coverage. The dude was reliable. He had just 2 drops all season long, despite going over the middle of the field and taking some big hits. And check this out right here. Ladd McConkey ranked top 5 in both first downs per route run and touchdowns per route run amongst rookie wide receivers and tight ends since 2006. Look at this list. #1 Odell, #2 Gronk, #3 Puka, #4 McConkey, ahead of a bunch of really strong names like Justin Jefferson, Michael Thomas, Tank Dell are on this list. That's how good Ladd McConkey was last year. He was getting first downs and touchdowns, which if you watch the wide receivers documentary on Netflix, Devontae Adams, a great wide receiver, said that he gets paid in the NFL to get first downs and touchdowns. That's what teams care about. And McConkey's target competition, it's a little bit different this year. They brought in some young guns. They bring in Trey Harris in the second round. Should be the starter. We'll see. He's battling with Quentin Johnson right now in camp for a top 2 wide receiver spot. Keandre Lambert-Smith, also known as KLS, is also having a great training camp, a later round rookie wide receiver for this team. Outside of that, though, yeah, Darius Davis has some speed. Jalen Reagor is getting some first team reps in camp as well, but it's going to be clearly Ladd McConkey as the #1, both in 3 and 2 wide receiver sets. And we'll see what happens. If Trey Harris wins the #2 job as a second round pick out of Ole Miss, who led the college football landscape in receiving yards per game last year, that's great. I think he's a guy who can stretch the field and only open up more things in the short to intermediate parts for Ladd McConkey. So when I see McConkey going in like the early parts of round 3, like I think AJ Brown's also great. It's the same argument that we just had with CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson. These are 2 great wide receivers. That's why they go in like round 2 or so of fantasy drafts. They're both great. I think I take AJ Brown in a good amount of drafts as well. But if you're telling me I can go out there and get another guy in round 2 and then in round 3 grab a Ladd McConkey, I'll just take that upside a little bit more. And if we have to poke some holes in AJ Brown, here's the reasons why I would compared to one Ladd McConkey. First off, AJ Brown has to compete with another elite wide receiver, former first round pick in Devonta Smith, which Ladd McConkey just doesn't have to compete with. He also has to compete with a proven NFL tight end who, you know, he's not going to be a guy who goes out there and has like 1,000 yards, but Dallas Goedert on a week in and week out basis has the ability to have 100 yards, has the ability to have a multi-touchdown game, where as of right now, Ladd McConkey doesn't have that same tight end threat. And oh yeah, out of the backfield is Saquon Barkley, who went for over 2,300 or so total yards last year, or right around 2,300. He'll catch a lot of passes. There's not that same threat, although I like Amarian Hampton. We can't compare him to Saquon right now in the Chargers offense. The Eagles also have the best offensive line. They will run the ball a lot. They have a solid defense, which could limit shootouts in terms of the overall ceilings for games for AJ Browns. Again, we have to poke holes in this. Both of these guys are great, but give me Ladd McConkey for a cheaper price point especially. So there you have it. Those are 5 guys that you should be taking instead right now and not falling into the traps that everybody else is currently making at the wide receiver position. Now, don't forget to go get that free top 50 overall rankings with the link in the description below, or you can head to fantasyrankingsfree.com. It's going to help you dominate those early rounds of your fantasy drafts. Now, if you want to see the running back version of this exact video, you can identify where people are going wrong and the running backs you should be taking instead. Well, you can check out this video that recently released just a couple of days ago right here. I think it's going to help you out a ton.